Meet the bacterial cell. To really understand their weapons, we've got to establish a baseline first. Take eukaryotic cells, for example, like the ones making up you and me. They're super complex. We've got a true nucleus protecting our DNA and these fancy membrane-bound organelles, like mitochondria. But then look at prokaryotic cells, like bacteria. They're a totally different story. They are far less complex. No true defined nucleus, no complex organelles. Their DNA just kind of floats right there in the cytoplasm. Instead, they rely heavily on a rugged cell envelope and really simple internal structures to get the job done.
When we look under the microscope, bacteria typically range in size from 0.2 to 5 microns, and they present themselves in a few classic morphological shapes. You've got Cocci, which are your circular or spherical ones. You've got Bacilli, which are rod-shaped. Then you have the slightly more unique forms, right? Spirochetes, which look a lot like spiral corkscrews, and Vibrio, which are basically comma-shaped. Finally, there are the pleomorphic bacteria. These are the rule breakers. They're irregular and lack a definitive static shape altogether. Now, the absolute crucial thing to remember here is that a bacterium's shape is entirely maintained by its rigid cell wall.
Now, that concept gives us a massive clinical pearl when it comes to those pleomorphic bacteria. Think about the Mycoplasma species. Mycoplasma are pleomorphic precisely because they completely lack a cell wall. They literally only have a cell membrane. Because they lack that rigid outer structure, they don't have a definitive shape. But more importantly for us, because they lack a cell wall, drugs like penicillin or cephalosporins, which specifically target and disrupt cell wall synthesis, are completely 100% useless against them. You just can't destroy a wall that isn't there.
Let's look at the gear that lets them move around, latch onto our tissues, and basically endure extreme environments.
First up, the flagella. These are long, whip-like filaments powered by ATP that act like an outboard motor to give the bacteria motility. Next, we have fimbria. Think of these as short, highly numerous, hair-like structures whose primary job is to act as tiny anchors, allowing them to adhere to host cell surfaces. Finally, we have pili. Pili are thicker, longer, and much less numerous than fimbriae. And here's an interesting distinction. While the blueprints to build flagella and fimbriae come from the primary bacterial chromosome, the instructions for pili actually come from a separate, tiny circle of DNA called a plasmid. This brings us to a process called bacterial conjugation, which perfectly illustrates why plasmids are so terrifying in a clinical setting. Actually, think of the pilus as a genetic grappling hook. A bacterium that has a specific plasmid, we'll call it F-positive, builds this pilus and shoots it out to connect to a neighboring F-negative bacteria. The pilus forms a literal tunnel. The F-positive bacteria replicates its plasmid and shoots a copy right across that tunnel to its neighbor. Boom, now both are F-positive. Why does this matter to us? Because these plasmids routinely carry highly dangerous traits like the gene to produce beta-lactamase, an enzyme that destroys antibiotics like penicillin. They are literally passing antibiotic resistance around like trading cards.
Beyond just appendages, the fortress might also be equipped with a thick outer shield called a capsule. A capsule is a prime example of a virulence factor. This is a highly organized polysaccharide layer that sits completely outside the cell wall. Because it's negatively charged, and our immune system's white blood cells, like neutrophils, are also negatively charged, the capsule acts like a magnetic repellent. It basically operates as an invisibility cloak, effectively blocking our macrophages and neutrophils from grabbing on and performing phagocytosis.
The Great Graham Divide.
But first, let me pose a quick question to frame your thinking. The inside of a bacterium, its cytoplasm, is incredibly hyperosmotic compared to the human fluids it usually swims around in. Basic physics tells us that water will desperately try to rush into this hyperosmotic space. So what on earth prevents the bacterium from infinitely absorbing water, swelling up like a balloon, and just exploding?
The answer to that is the cell wall, but specifically a macromolecule called Peptidoglycan. The really crucial takeaway here is that the cell wall is not a major permeability barrier. It's actually highly porous. Instead, it acts as a rigid pressure vessel. It's made of alternating sugar backbones, NAM and NAG, woven together and heavily cross-linked by short peptide chains. This massive cage-like polymer wraps entirely around the bacterium. So when water rushes in and the internal cell membrane starts to swell, it just pushes right up against this rigid peptidoglycan cage, totally preventing what we call an osmotic burst. Now, the architecture of this pressure vessel divides almost all of microbiology into two massive camps. Gram-positive bacteria have a tremendously thick wall. We're talking up to 60 layers of peptidoglycan.
And buried right inside this thick wall is lipoteichoic acid, a molecule that can trigger massive immune responses in patients. Gram-negative bacteria, on the flip side, have a very thin wall, maybe only 3 layers of peptidoglycan. But to compensate for that thin wall, they possess a unique outer lipid membrane that acts as a selective shield. This creates a gap between the inner and outer membranes known as the periplasmic space. That space is exactly where sneaky enzymes like beta-lactamase like to hide.
Let's look a little closer at that gram-negative outer membrane, because embedded right in it is a molecule called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. I want you to file this away for your sepsis lectures later on, because this is incredibly important. LPS is an endotoxin made of 3 parts. On the very outside, you have the O antigen, which is what our body's antibodies recognize and attack. In the middle is a core polysaccharide, but the anchor, the absolute red flag here, is lipid A. Lipid A is highly toxic. If this bacteria enters the bloodstream, lipid A massively overstimulates macrophages to release a tsunami of cytokines. This leads to severe fever, widespread vasodilation, dropping blood pressure, and ultimately septic shock.
So how do we actually tell these 2 fortresses apart in the lab? We use the iconic Gram stain. First, we flood the slide with crystal violet, which soaks right into all the peptidoglycan, making everything purple. Step 2, we add iodine. This acts as a mordant, think of it like cement, locking the purple dye deep inside those thick, 60-layer gram-positive walls. Step 3 is the critical ethanol wash. This rapidly strips the dye right out of the thin, loosely protected gram-negative walls, leaving them entirely colorless. But those thick gram-positive walls stubbornly hold on to the purple. Finally, we use safranin to counterstain those now colorless gram-negative walls pink. And that is the structural logic behind why gram-positive tests purple and gram-negative tests pink.
Inside the cytoplasm, you aren't going to find a nucleus. You basically just have a massive tangled circle of primary DNA in the nucleoid, plus those small trading card plasmids we talked about earlier. I want to clearly contrast how this genetic command center divides its toxic payload instructions. Endotoxins, like the lipid A in the cell wall structure we just went over, are encoded right on the main primary bacterial chromosome. They are literally a structural part of the bacteria itself. Exotoxins, on the other hand, are highly toxic proteins that the bacteria actively secretes out into its environment, and the instructions for these are usually encoded on those extra chromosomal plasmids.
Also residing inside this command center are penicillin-binding proteins. These are the enzymes that cross-link that peptidoglycan cage. This leads to a truly crucial clinical pharmacology insight. When a patient takes penicillin, the drug gets inside and jams those binding proteins. The bacteria can no longer cross-link its wall, but it's still growing. Its cytoplasm is still hyperosmotic, and it is still absorbing water. Without that rigid wall to hold it all back, the dividing bacteria simply pop under their own internal pressure. The drug doesn't kill them directly. It literally weaponizes their own osmotic pressure against them.
For a select group of gram-positive bacteria, like your Clostridium and Bacillus species, the answer to harsh, starving conditions is to form an endospore. When the environment becomes too extreme, these bacteria don't just roll over and die. Instead, they hit a biological panic button. They effectively eject most of their cytoplasm and bunker down their essential DNA into a highly resilient, completely dormant, and nearly indestructible biological vault. Because it's totally dehydrated and heavily shielded by keratin, basic disinfectants, UV radiation, and even boiling heat simply cannot penetrate it.
Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.